Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About It with your boy. Let's talk about grief and the stages of grief and maybe some tips to help you out during your grieving process. Because currently for me, I've been grieving for the past year and a half, and it's because of the loss of my grandmother. My grandmother passed away in August of 2021. That was my woman right there, man. That was my mom and dad, and losing her really threw really threw things off for me, right? Because at the time, or prior to the loss of my grandmother, I had no idea what, well, like, I mean, I guess I say I knew what grief was, but I never dealt with grief myself in the magnitude or in the manner that I am currently in. And that's because I didn't really lose anybody on the level of my grandmother. And it's not to say that I wasn't hurt when, past people left me and stuff like that, or people that have left me in the past. But with my grandmother, it hit hard. And I understand now, you know, why people say you don't get over it. I understand why people that are grieving say it comes in waves. So I'm getting a the in-depth look into the grieving process and everything that comes with it. Now, I wanted to see, like, we all, like, growing up, you know, whether it's, hearing it on TV or hearing it out in the world, like you hear of the, stages of grief and stuff like that. And I kind of I wanted to go through all the stages and and kind of talk about if my stages came, you know, in the right order, or is there an order, because I've read that some people say that there's an order to the stages, and so for me, I'll just say this. So here are the five stages. I believe I seen on online that some have seven, or I seen some articles that say seven, but I didn't really look too close into it. But so we got so for the five stages of grief, you got denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So what I'm gonna do is we'll go the first stage, I guess you can call it the denial stage, right? And I guess you could say, for me, yes, I'm still in denial at times, because it's because my grandmother was such a pillar and staple, uh was a huge, like, part of who I am, that it's hard to snap out of, not wanting to call her and stuff like that. So denial for me was most definitely like wanting to, hit my grandmother up and wanting to call her, because just recently, last semester, I got on the dean's list, and the first thing I wanted to do was call my grandmother because education was big for her, and she used to take pride in our accomplishments, and that was that was a huge thing, because one, I never expected it. I never expected to get on the dean's list, because I actually, honestly, I thought the dean's list was like a unicorn thing. Honestly, I the dean's list growing up for me was like for the smart kids, right? So when I made the dean's list, one, I was shocked, but two, it brought me back to, you know what I wanted to do when I first found out that I did, and that was to hit up my grandmother. And I catch myself sometimes still texting her cell phone, and it's not one of those. Trust me, I'm not expecting her to text me back, because I know, you know, but it was just, it's things like that that I deal with in this grieving process. And I'm looking at I'm looking at some of this article, The Stages of Grief, by the University of Washington. And they got a few they got a breakdown on, what denial, what the stages of grief can look like, and what they can feel like. And so I kind of wanted to run through a few of them. So denial can look like avoidance, procrastination, forgetting, easily distracted. And yeah, most definitely, most definitely the avoidance, like it looks like, I may try to avoid maybe seeing things on TV that involve, you know, a grandson and a grandmother relationship. But I learned through my grieving process that I want to see, I want to see certain things to remind me of my grandmother. And like I said, like, because everybody's different, everybody grieves different, and my grieving is different from my wife's grieving, and my wife's grieving may be different from the way my son grieves, or stuff like that. So for me, for me, I I want to see like old pictures of my grandmother. I want to, listen to certain things like voicemails and things of that nature, because I miss her, and hearing her voice, just hearing her voicemail, just hearing her voice, looking at some of her pictures. Like, this is my home screen. Like, I know some people, when they lose loved ones, they can't, stomach seeing, their fate, like their pictures and stuff like that. And I get it. I totally get it, because my wife is like that, and I totally get it. But for me, like I said, people grieve differently. But for me, I have to see, I look forward to seeing pictures of my grandmother every time I open up my phone, because that was my everything. And I don't ever want to forget what she looks like. I don't ever want to forget the sound of her voice. So that's my grieving process, because we all have different processes of grieving too. Like, yeah, there are certain there are stages, right? The stages I can assume stay the same, right? But the process of us dealing with the grief is going to be different for everybody. All right, so let's move on to the next stage, anger, right? I mean, that's obvious. And there's so many things when you lose somebody. There's a lot of things that go on in your head that will prompt you to start putting the blame and directing frustration towards certain people, uh and for me, I could say, like, I'll go through some of the things that they said that anger can look like: pessimism, sarcasm, irritability, being aggressive or passive aggressive. And for me, sarcasm was already on the was already on the table before. I've always been a sarcastic person. So, but my for me, my I most definitely dealt with anger during my grieving process, because part of me was angry with myself, right? Because I start looking at the past things, and you start thinking about memories, good and bad. And the ones that get me angry at myself are, I look at the bad memories in terms of times where I may have, fussed out my grandmother or been mean and stuff like that, not have called or ignored her phone calls. And that stuff gets to me. That stuff really, that, like, still now, like, I was having this conversation. The reason, and the reason why I wanted to talk about grief for this episode, because I was just talking to my brother the other day, and we both was breaking down over the phone, talking about how much we miss, Grams, and some of the things that I was dealing with in terms of um where I was at mentally and stuff like that. I was actually I was actually unaware that some of the feelings that I was having, my brother was having. And it just goes to show you that grieving is a wild card, because some people take losses and it's nothing to them, right? But then you also have those people, like, say, for instance, me, right? That that doesn't really, deal with it well. Well, I'll say this, for the most part, prior to my grandmother passing, I dealt with loss fairly fairly easy, in a sense. And honestly, a part of me actually thought, like, something was wrong with me, like emotionally, because I wasn't reacting the way, like I say, I use my wife grieving as an example. Like when my brother-in-law passed away, my wife's brother, I was devastated, but my wife was broken, right? And sometimes if you're not, if y'all don't grieve the same, right? Then sometimes you'll look at other people grieving and be like, like I understand, but then some parts of me be like, dang, like I get it, but we got to be strong. We got to, you know, try to look, towards the future and try to, be strong about it, right? And it wasn't, and what I'm saying is, it wasn't me being dismissive of, say my wife's feelings and grieving process. It was, you know, because like I said, everyone grieves different. So if I'm dealing with my grief well, or in my mind, I'm dealing with it okay. And when you see someone else not dealing with it the same way that you are, you know, you start to wonder, like, no, it's gonna be okay. But so when my grandmother passed, I truly understood why my wife sometimes will break down. I can understand why, you know, certain dates, certain times of the year, especially around, you know, the anniversary of the event, and the passing, and also anniversaries of birthdays and stuff. Like, I get, like, now I get it, because I lost somebody to me, and this is just to me. I lost somebody on the same caliber as, or the grief that the grief that I'm going through is on the same level now as when my wife was going through it. So now I can truly say, like, yeah, I understand why you're still, years after, the passing of your brother, you're still having these emotions and moods and stuff like that. At first I didn't get it. At first I wasn't, it wasn't registering at all. I was, I didn't get it. And it wasn't like, oh, passive, you got to get over it. Stop, you're tripping. It wasn't that. It was just, I didn't understand it. But now when my grandmother passed, and that was somebody that was near and dear to me. And I've always, growing up with my upbringing and stuff, a lot of my reactions to certain things, a lot of my um attitude towards certain certain events or tragedies or whatever the case may be, that would have a different effect with other people, or you know everybody else, didn't really have an effect on me, right? Or it's just, I grew up, or I'll say this, because I don't ever want to say I grew up differently than most people, because everybody has a story, everybody has a an experience that they've had, that may have shaped and molded them into who they are now. And so what I'm trying to get at is, prior to losing my grandmother, and because of my upbringing and how certain things hardened my heart, made me have that it is what it is type of attitude, the nonchalant type um attitude towards life, except itself. So when certain you know tragedies, passings, and stuff like that would happen growing up, I handled it well and I moved on. But when it came to my grandmother, it was a whole new territory for me. And I couldn't just brush this one off. I couldn't just say, all right, it is what it is. I couldn't just say, all right, RIP, I'm gonna miss you, and just keep it moving. I couldn't do that because Grams was everything. My mom, my dad, like, so it activated or uncovered, I say, it uncovered so many emotions buried down that I am seeing, because I think because I didn't have a lot of emotions and certain feelings, I guess you can say, like the average normal person, right? Because I didn't have that, when I would get losses, there weren't stages of grief for me, because the reason why I feel now there are stages that I'm dealing with now is because there's certain emotions attached to these stages, right? There's certain feelings that are associated with the different types of stages. And because I didn't have those feelings or emotions like that, because I buried them, uh I didn't I didn't have a trouble, or I didn't have a problem with the so-called stages of grief, because essentially whenever I would hit these certain stages, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, like when I was hitting those stages, whenever those stages got there, and the emotion and feeling that should be attached to those stages, when they weren't registering, it was all right, on to the next, just move to the next stage. All right, well, I'm good. I guess I'm dealing with my stages of grief. Like, I guess I'm cool. I guess I can, I can do well with grief. But whenever my grandmother passed, it was like every emotion that you can think of that I stuffed down, just to survive, you know, in my eyes, right? But now that all that stuff opened up, now I can see, all right, I see why you're having trouble with denial. I can see why, you know, you're frustrated. I can see why you feel guilty. Like, I can see that now, because all those emotions came up. So now, yes, I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. I feel, I have, certain pockets and certain times where, yes, I do feel depressed and really messed up. Like, that's one thing. You know what? I'm not ashamed to say, like, yo, I've been I've been in a dark place for the past year and a half, since the passing of my grands. At times I've gotten dark. At times I've gotten in a sunken place, right? In a place where I don't want to do anything. Uh, I've gotten in a place where, I'm snappy at my wife. I'm snappy at my son, and it's not an excuse, and it's and I don't like it, but I'm understanding that there may be a reason why. There may be a reason why, you know, at times I may have an attitude and stuff like that. But what I don't want to do is I don't ever want to make excuses for, you know, me being in that space, and then the way I react at times. That I don't want to get comfortable in that, because there's still other people involved. There's still, you know, when I act the way I act because of, what I'm dealing with my grieving process, that still affects, my wife. That still affects my son, my friends, and stuff like that. So I try to be mindful, and of course you can't control when when grief decides to say hi, right? But I can, there's things that you can do in your grieving process, so that you don't, in the midst of you dealing with, you know, whatever it is that you're dealing with, whether it's a loss or something like that. I want to, in the midst of all that, you still should be able to, find uh, a resolution in it, because those are your loved ones that you don't want to push away because of what you're dealing with. So I would suggest. I mean, there's therapy out there. I know. The whole mental health thing is a trending thing right now, and a part of me wants to, I'll say this. A part of me I have something to say about, why they have that as why it's so trending. Like, but in all honesty, I get it. Like, people, I know for me, like, as I've gotten older, and especially with the loss of my grandmother, it brought it brought up so many things that now I'm having a hard time dealing with it in my head, right? So I understand the need for, the need for therapy, or the need for, mental health type of outlets. There's a need for that, because that stuff is real. Mental health issues, mental health problems, that stuff is real. And and I didn't me personally didn't think I would me personally didn't think that I would have any troubles or issues with, my mental health, because growing up I thought, yeah, I had some troubling and tough times growing up that, shaped me and molded me to the way that I act now and stuff like that. But I didn't really. I guess I get. I guess you could say I did a good job at hiding and masking those problems, but they manifested themselves through the way that I would, treat certain things and react to certain things. But that changed. And now, because of all the emotions that are just that are flowing through my body and bouncing around all up in my head, it's like a part of me, like the I guess you could say the old me that would suppress certain things and stuff like that. That old me tries, still makes his way there, like in terms of how I will deal with certain things. That guy is still there. Like that old me in terms of how I deal with certain things is still there. Like he pops up when dealing with things, but now my feelings are coming with it now. That new the new me, the I guess you could say the grieving me uh pops up now, and I get or the new me in result of me grieving, right? He pops up. So now it's a it's a battle. So that's what I say, I'm that's why I'm having, or I say this, that's why I can understand, the importance of mental health, because now I'm dealing with it now. I used to be one of those people years ago that would, say why, like, why you tripping, or why, why these people having these type of issues and this and that. But now I get it now. And I guess, as crazy as it sounds, it took my grandmother passing to realize that, damn, I do have some I I do have some things that I got that I'm dealing with mentally. And for one, that's okay. But now that I do have those issues and certain problems and stuff like that mentally, now it's time to attack it and see what we can do to fix things. It's going to be hard, but I'm not against therapy. I haven't found a I haven't found a therapist yet, but I don't mind therapy at all. Like, to be honest, I actually I would love to just give somebody an earful of, like, of my life, my past traumas. Like, me personally, I think my mind is a therapist's candy store, right? The things that I've dealt with growing up, and some of the situations that I was, been put in growing up, and all of that, therapists would love it, because I mean, I've dealt with a lot of things growing up, and I I dealt with them pretty well, in my opinion, or I suppressed them very well, and a lot of things didn't bother me. I've always been, and I still am in terms of, like, I'm I've always been a nonchalant person, um but that's because of, certain things. uh but now some things pull on my heart now. Some things are starting to, affect me a little bit more, and I don't have the capacity to just say, nah, it is what it is. I can't now because my feelings and emotions are playing a major part in things now. Because prior to that, I didn't let my emotions come in. I didn't let my feelings get in the way of you know, certain things and stuff like that. But now my emotions are on full display, and it's because of grieving and the loss of my grandmother, and just dealing with the grieving process. So, but I know I know things are gonna be good. Things are gonna be all right. But it could be tough at times. It could be tough at times. But now, honestly, like I was telling my brother when we were having this conversation about Grams, that I actually like it. I love that I'm like this now, like more emotional. So I love it actually. I really do, because I'm starting to look at life differently now. Trust me. I'm talking to I'm talking to all the nonchalant people out there. So like that, like it just feels good to see my emotions playing out now, because the nonchalant me, I mean, it wasn't the things that would pop up and happen, or things like that, wasn't a big deal to me. It's like, all right, things happen, shit happens. I mean, like, it is what it is. But now, with more raw emotions and feelings uh coming up and resurfacing and stuff like that, or finally getting their chance to actually be, you know, allowing me to be vulnerable. Like, I cry a lot now. Like, I do. I didn't. I never really wasn't a. I never really was a crier like that. But now I cry probably almost every other day, whether it's a full out cry or just some tears. And it's just, and it could be about something that I'm watching on TV. It's matter of fact, most of my crying comes from uh emotional parts and very sensitive parts, or moments on movies and shows that I never used to get emotional about or tear up about. But now that I do, like seeing um relationships between father and son, mother son, like those type of things, or best friends, you know, those all moments on TV and movies and stuff. I never it wasn't a big deal for me. It was just like, oh, that's what's up. Now, homecomings of uh military people coming home from deployments and stuff like that, seeing you know people with people with like disabilities and stuff like that doing well. I've always been a advocate of special needs people, and people with disabilities. Always, I've always been like that. But it's on 10 now with all my emotions. Like, I've always I've always been a person that didn't really invest too much into feelings and stuff like that. But now that everything is with the passing of my grandmother, it's like I said, I like it. Like, I like being able to tear up and stuff like that for joyous moments and precious moments. I wasn't like that before, right? So yes, it's different. It's a little bit of a mental shock for me, but all in all, I love it. I love that I get emotional when I see things, happy things. It's not just the I used to just be like, if something is sad, like, yeah, I can maybe tear up. But now it's not only if something's sad, but if something is just, love and stuff like that. Now I get emotional now. So my grieving process most definitely, um it's I'm still grieving now, but I'm embracing my grief, and because there's a lot of things that came out of, you know, the passing of my grandmother and the process of me dealing with it and stuff like that. A lot of positive things uh are happening mentally and internally, and that's a good thing for me because you always want to grow, for one. And I feel for me being able to tap into, my emotional side and really get in tune with my feelings, that's a big plus for me. That's big. That's huge in the growth department with me. So yeah, this it's it's a process, but I'm fine with the process, and it's okay to grieve. Everyone grieves differently, and everybody grieves differently, and we got to be able to embrace just being like, it's okay. Like, that's the thing. Grieving, you're not alone. So if you feel stuck, you feel like, what the heck, what's going on? Like, why? I felt that too. I felt it, and I still do at times. So I get it. And just because, like, for me, the acceptance stage of grief, for me, like, I accepted it because I I've always, for me, like, I do think logic, like, and let me change that. For me, I know what's what and what's not. So I accepted the fact that I accepted the fact that, yes, my grandmother is no longer physically here on this earth. Like, I accepted that. But of course, at times, at times I'm like, nah, she not really gone. So the acceptance stage for me wasn't tough. It wasn't like I needed, it wasn't like I was struggling to accept the fact that my grandmother was gone. Like, I knew, like, I know when somebody dies, right? I know when somebody dies that they're no longer there, right? So I know that aspect. So in terms of being able to accept the fact that that person's no longer here, wasn't hard for me. But I still had I had my times where, like I was just talking about earlier, that you know, I'll text, I've texted Graham sometimes, but that's like, I still know that she's not going to text me back. So I'm aware of the that she's gone physically. So in terms of the acceptance aspect of it, you know, I didn't really have a too much of an issue with, the acceptance process. And that's supposed to be like that's supposed to be, quote unquote, the last, step or stages of grief. But to be honest, I'm looking at the stages right now, and they're, like I said earlier, I'm guessing the stages, according to most people, happening in order. But for me, a lot of my stuff was, bounced around, right? So depression, I mean, that's kind of like, I mean, come on now. When you lose somebody, of course you're gonna be sad. You're gonna be sitting in a so yeah, that one, I say the ones that linger, the stages that linger for me, is the biggest one is the feeling sad and, depressed. Like that is the biggest one for me, because the reason why this one uh this one hits so hard, or it's the longest for me, is because this is the one that taps into majority of the all majority of the feelings that was cracked open, right? The sadness, the despair, the helplessness, like all that stuff, disappointment, all of those feelings are like the big major, like, so it's it's always going to be a process. It's not going to go away. Grief doesn't go away. The only thing that you can do with grief is learn how to deal with it. That's the only thing you can do with grief. Grief is not something uh that you get rid of. Most times it's just you learned how to deal with it. And that's the only thing, that's the major thing I could say is, if you are grieving and you feel like, damn, why am I keep, going through this and going through it and going through it? It's because grief doesn't have a an expiration date. It don't. It doesn't have a time limit on any. It doesn't have a time on when it's going to stop. So if we can find ways to, deal with some of your grief, because like I said, it's not going to go away, but you can find ways to deal with it, whether it's exercising, finding hobbies, praying is big for me. But just find different outlets for you. And that's just with anything in life. Anything in life, whether it's grief, hardships, breakups, um, anything. You want to find ways to deal with it. You want to find ways to be able to maneuver through life by also still dealing with the loss of a loved one, or you know being unhappy here, like job, anything. I want you to be able to figure things out, and it's because you can. It'll take time, but if you're willing, you got to be willing to want to you know make things somewhat normal, because like I said, dealing with grief, especially if it hits deep, then you're going to have to find ways to maneuver through it. And that's something I've been dealing with and been working on myself. So you're not alone. But I really appreciate y'all listening. to another episode of Let's Talk About It with your boy. Let's talk about it.